The mobility ecosystem is and will be formed by disruption. And that disruption comes in the forms of what Fujitsu calls the 3 Cs: consciousness, connectivity, and convergence. Let me start by explaining to you what we mean by consciousness. Consciousness is really the consumer taking control. It was already there prior to COVID. It's now accelerated more post-COVID. Consciousness is about caring about the environment, caring about the planet, thinking about your purchasing decisions in a different context, going beyond planned obsolescence. In the past, we were sold to by large automotives, by other organizations that wanted us to buy the latest product. They made us feel that last year's model wasn't good enough. They made us feel we needed this year's model. Consciousness makes us think twice about those type of purchasing decisions. It makes us think, do we really want to have the environmental impact of renewing a vehicle every year? And those type of consciousness decisions then start to get exasperated as we think about the world of post-COVID. We start thinking differently about the new world that we're in. I'll give an example on that. We think about somebody who has been either furloughed or now finds themselves working at home and no longer commuting. And they look out on their driveway and see 2 cars and think, is there a reason why I need 2 cars when neither of us are leaving the house? Or maybe one of us leaves the house, so therefore we can go down to 1 car. Or maybe we can just go straight to a mobility solution and just pay when we use. The use of a car traditionally was only ever 2% of ownership. So you'd own the car 100% of the time, but use it 2% of the time. That doesn't make great sense in terms of an investment. And that's the type of consciousness decision that's going to start to change the marketplace. The consumer is going to take control. They're going to look for greater customer experiences that fits the needs of their modern living. And that's the world that the businesses are going to have to respond to. The second C is connectivity. And connectivity is an obvious one, I guess, in as much as it's driven by the 5G revolution. It's driven by what was the Internet of Things and the ability for us to connect multiple devices and to capture huge amounts of data. And that data can then be used to create value. The consumer is going to look for that value, and the companies that can succeed in harnessing that data are the ones that we're going to win. And if you look at the technology spines that sit behind this, it's going to be the supercomputers that capture huge amount of data. It's going to be the quantum computers of the future that can optimize that data. And then it's going to be the simulators, the twinning, the digital twinning type solutions that can then start to formulate and create new business models from that data. And all of that will start to drive a new connected ecosystem that creates new possibilities, that starts to tap into those customer experience models and starts to think about the art of the possible and what we can do as organizations as we look to increase the betterment of mankind and create a new mobility ecosystem. And the third of the C's is convergence. And what we mean by convergence is the fact that we've got to stop looking at our ecosystems in the paradigm of what was our previous business models, the 20th century business models, the 20th century sectors. Companies that still think that way are the ones that are probably going to miss out. We've got to start looking towards the future of this converged mobility ecosystem. So let me give an example of what a converged ecosystem might look like. Let's imagine that I work in New York and I commute from the suburbs. So what I'll be able to do is I'll have my mobility vehicle provider send a vehicle to my home to pick me up and take me into the office. Whilst I'm traveling in, the mobility service provider will offer me all sorts of entertainment, maybe some box sets I can watch, the ability for me to shop online, to do some home banking. There's all sorts of things I could be doing whilst I'm commuting because I'm no longer driving. And when I arrive in the office, I'll be dropped off maybe at curbside location C5 on the corner of 46th and Lexington. And that curbside location C5 will be billed from the city of New York to my mobility provider and ultimately to my tariff. And all of that creates opportunities for multiple players on the way in. I then work for the day in the office, and then I call for my mobility service provider to pick me up and take me back home at the end of the day. Probably 90 seconds is about as much as the new world will accept. Well, I anticipate that vehicle to be available within 90 seconds. It might say go back to curbside location C5. It's the optimal place to my office. It might offer me, if I walk an extra block to D6, then the local coffee shop, the local Starbucks can offer me a coffee at the curbside location so I can actually take that with me in the vehicle. and that all gets automatically billed to my tariff. So these options become really viable. And then when I'm traveling home, I find that the pair of sneakers that I bought on the way into the office are in a pod in the back of that vehicle. I can open up biometrically, and I can actually get that last mile delivery service delivered to me in that instant gratification. So what I shop for online in the morning is with me by the time I go home. That could either be clothing, that could be food shopping, so I can then have my dinner, or it could be a pre-cooked dinner that's already in there. So there's a number of things that become opportunities for that converged market. And if you don't start anticipating those converged opportunities, if you don't start thinking about those future customer experience models and then walking back to today's reality, you're not going to be planning those tangible steps to arrive in the right place. Mobility is going to happen sooner than we think. The tipping point of change is 2025. We expect that to be an S-curve through to 2030. By then, these ecosystems will have been formed. And those converged markets need us to think differently to be able to make sure that we are successful in those ecosystems.